6.
6-3.
The first item of new business is the approval of proposed rules for educator preparation and accountability. And Michelle, I think you're speaking to that, correct? And you have copies. If Michelle is here, if you have questions, but you have copies of the actual rule promulgation. And we highlighted the areas that changes were made. And Michelle, why don't you speak to it briefly?
So what you have in front of you is what we're now coining REPA 3, but substantively it should be very close to REPA 2. There have been a lot of technical changes per the request of the Attorney General's office. Things specifying precise fees for licensure is an example of the kind of technical changes. Before we just said payment of fees, but now we're very precise in identifying what those fees would be. They're all highlighted. If anything was deleted, I put a comment because I can't highlight something that's been deleted, but I would put a comment in so that you all could see the changes between what you last saw and this document. If you have any questions.
So we don't know, I thought we were voting simply to reinstate the rule we had approved before, and then we would make the changes. Now you're telling us that there are changes you've made that we don't see here that are deletions. I see many substantive additions that don't have anything to do with law. They're just substantive changes. And I'm being asked with 6 hours notice or something to approve for purposes of public discussion stuff I've never seen before.
So,
And it does not, in my humble opinion, and I am an ex-lawyer, tie back to legal concerns. They tie to substantive additions or deletions.
I think that before the April meeting, we forwarded an email to all of the board members from the Deputy Attorney General who had reviewed the rule. I have not made any changes to this document that are not requested from the Attorney General's office. I'm the one who's been having to make the changes, and I have truly not made a single. So that's where. But what we could do would be change this to an approval of an initiation of rulemaking, and then actually at the next meeting approve proposed language. But that's going to mess up timeline issues. But if there are questions about the changes in the document itself, I'm more than happy to walk through those.
With all due respect, if the Attorney General's office or the Deputy Attorney General was standing there, I'd be having the same questions. So it's nothing to do with you personally. I just don't understand how adding a variety of provisions, I don't know what was deleted, that don't have anything to do with legal infirmities, has anything to do with what we thought was the issue. We got an email that the Attorney General sent you all a long time ago, but we didn't get the rule underneath it and the changes they were proposing. I'm just concerned that with 6 hours notice, we're supposed to be endorsing by putting into play something we've never seen, simply because the Attorney General's office, the Deputy Attorney General, has decided that pieces of this need to be added or subtracted.
We certainly do not need to proceed today. We thought it was the wishes of the board to proceed with the actual process because language can be changed.
Well, I think the question that's come up now is, did the Attorney General's office make substantive changes to the rule?
It's my opinion that these are largely technical changes. If there's an example of a change, the only change that I believe would be substantive in any way is a removal of language that previously referenced a code of ethics that's promulgated pursuant to what we call the test integrity rule. Since that code of ethics isn't in rule, but is something that's posted annually by August 1 each, that has been removed because the ability to revoke a license pursuant to a document that doesn't go through the rule promulgation process raised concerns. Now, the test integrity rule is still a valid rule. Any legal options under that rule remain, but it's just no longer in REPA. I say that's a technical change because it's being taken out for this technical reason of referencing something that's not a promulgated document.
So is this available
before last time?
It's been being passed back and forth
Right.
between the Attorney General's office and myself. And then we provided it to the governor's office because before we provided it to you all, we wanted to make sure that they saw the sorts of changes that were happening.
I just want to make it clear, we want to move on this, but this is the first time I've seen it. So I'm not in any position I will abstain because the timing of receiving this and being expected to vote on it, that's why I wanted to know when it was available. Because ideally, we would have gotten this a week ago, and I would assume the Attorney General's office knows this, that, you know, this is when we have our meetings. And so to give it to us 8 hours before our meeting is just inappropriate.
Well, and I certainly don't want to put any kind of blame on the Attorney General's office. They have been more than accommodating in terms of passing things back and forth. The document had a lot of technical deficiencies, and we have tried to remedy those, and
Right.
at times thought we have remedied them and received feedback to improve
Sure.
them yet
But
again.
these technical difficulties were known when we were informed a month ago. So it's like,
I mean, I feel even worse. I mean, it looks, looking through this quickly, it looks like only, you know, most of these yellow things are adding the freaking addresses of, you know, some of these organizations in Washington. And that was, you know, the Attorney General stopped a rule that we had spent months on and that had and enormous amounts of time deliberating and debating that were extremely important for crap like putting in the address of a national standards board. I mean, it's frankly, that's outrageous. It's just outrageous.
Actually, Neil, it does a little more than that. The section you're referencing adds a requirement that people comply with things that we didn't have them complying with.
We did, but we
Okay.
just referenced the organization without
Right.
properly incorporating by reference the standards. So perhaps, for example, with nurses, we previously just referenced, and this was even the case, this was what it did under what we call REPA 1. And it's the same thing that we did under what we call Rules 2002. But they simply referenced national standards without precisely identifying what those national standards were. And at this point, there's been a concern that we needed to properly incorporate those standards by reference. And so there's been these technical changes in order to achieve that deficiency so that people who want to be put on notice of what those national standards are know how to ascertain the exact copy of the
Yeah, and I
standards.
bet this is the first rule in Indiana history that requires that kind of specificity and was held up because of the need for that.
We, you know,
Just, like I
what,
said, it's just outrageous.
if I would take
I
a step back, the process in the rulemaking is so people know what we're proposing and can comment on it. So somewhere we've lost some perspective here, because it isn't like these changes, which I haven't been able to study, because if we were to move forward and start the process today, then we have another set of hearings and people get a comment on it. If indeed, David, we find some substantive changes through this process, we can amend and make right without starting all over again? Is
Fair
that,
enough. I just want to be blatantly clear that I vehemently disagree with some of the edits of the Attorney General being based on, Deputy Attorney General, being based on legal concerns as opposed to substantive issues. And I want to reserve the right for the board to exercise our own judgment and delete what we want to delete and add what we want to add, knowing that it'll go back to the Attorney General one more time.
this whole process?
I don't want this to be an affirmation that we agree with what's just been put in front of us. That's all I'm saying.
Well, I would say that if we approved this as proposed language, it is somewhat of a statement of agreeing with the language as approved. If there are examples of language that you all think as we move forward are substantive changes, I'm more than happy to explain how those changes were placed into the document. The examples I've been giving, I think, are the norm for how this process has taken place over the last few weeks. Again, a lot of examples where we referenced things in a more vague manner, and now we've been asked to be precise about it or incorporate by reference in a very specific way. It has not been intended to be a substantive change. It has been,
In 6 years on this board, we've gone through this process, we've never had to add the kinds of things that have been added here. You know, I hope we
There's some
talk-
other agenda going on here. There's
Yeah,
people that
we've
played with
never
this. They didn't want it to pass, and let me might as well put the cards on the table. It's pretty obvious what's happened here. And
Madam Chair, move to approve the proposed rule as amended.
that
Second.
pretty well destroys a lot of
Any more
trust.
discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Aye.
Madam Superintendent,
Oh, roll call. I'm so sorry. Okay.
you like me to
Yes,
call?
please.
Joe? Aye. Jim? Dan?
Aye.
Sarah's absent. Mike?
Nay.
Neil?
Aye.
David?
Aye.
Tony?
Aye.
BJ?
Aye.
Carrie's absent. Superintendent Ritz?
No.
7 to 2. The motion carries.
The next item of new business is approval of teacher examinations and proposed cut scores. Risa Renee?
We have a new incoming vendor for our licensure examinations, which is Pearson Evaluation Systems. And based on the educator and developmental standards that were developed and adopted in 2010, they have been developing new assessments for us for licensure. And you have a list of 61 assessments that have been developed, and I can't count. We have actually 59 proposed cut scores that we would like approved. We have 2 tests that have not been through standard setting yet, and we do not have proposed cut scores for them. The rules require that we give notice to the public for comment purposes of proposed tests and proposed cut scores that the board is considering adopting. So, and we're required to post some summary information about each of the tests and the proposed scores. I've given you a list of the examinations that have been developed, and we are recommending that the board preliminarily adopt the panel recommended passing scores, which were, those were the results of the standard setting process that took place in March. And there were about 550 educators from all over the state that came in and participated on those standard setting panels. So we would recommend your preliminary approval for the panel recommended passing scores that are highlighted on your chart. And those will be posted along with the test blueprints for each of those assessments that give an overview and summary information about those tests. And we gave you an example of one of those test blueprints. I think we gave you the elementary education, one of the elementary blueprints to look at. But we're asking that you would give preliminary approval to 61 proposed tests on the list, and then the 59 panel proposed cut scores that are in your chart.
Do I hear a motion to approve the proposed teacher examinations and proposed cut scores as presented? Anybody going to make a motion? Because we can't proceed on these tests.
I have some questions. I don't,
Sure.
before I couldn't make a motion on this until I understood better why some of the scores seem so low, passing scores. Just to give one example, that there are several middle school social studies that total possible points 80, recommended passing score 45. That's just a little bit more than half of the total points to be considered passing. I mean, what I know about cut scores, you could, probably put in this cup over here, so I've got to be careful, but that strikes me as initially very low. And there are a number of these where the cut score, where the total points are 8, the passing score is somewhere around 50, which is 30 points off, again, not much more than half of the total points. I find that very problematic.
There is a representative from Pearson who was involved in the score setting process who can probably answer those questions much better than I can.
Great. Send them up.
Nancy? This is Nancy Hahn from Pearson.
Hi, I think I'm going to try and address your question directly, and if I don't, we can step back and talk about the process overall. The social studies tests, I think, have 56 possible score points. And we have it, then there might be a...
Middle school social studies, total possible score points 80.
Oh, middle school social studies,
sorry.
yeah. No, that is correct. There are also some social studies
Yeah.
tests that have 56.
Right.
Okay. How the standard setting process works is that you gather together educators and teacher educators, and you train them to think about the knowledge and skills that are needed for a teacher to receive their license. It's an industry accepted standard that we go through, and the panel recommended scores that you see here are an outcome of that process. So basically what they do is they look at the test design, they look at the assessment blueprints, which tie them back to the educator standards, and they look at each item and make their judgments. In setting a standard, we're not so concerned to have a score be a certain percentage of items on a test. What's really important is to think about the process of setting the standards and that the standard be set at the appropriate level for being able to issue a teacher license.
But there's got to be some correlation between those two, doesn't there? I mean, I understand the fact that you're not concerned about maybe a particular percentage, but you're giving a test, you're assigning a certain number of points to the test, and then you're kind of developing some level at which you either pass or fail. So I guess I just don't see why it wouldn't be higher, why you wouldn't want the person to have more, to demonstrate mastery of as much of that total test, what you're testing on, as possible.
Well, the flip side of looking at that is that the educators, when they were looking at what content is included on the test, and that's why we post the assessment blueprints with the links back to the standards, and they then looked at the items, that they thought that that level of knowledge and skill was an appropriate reflection for someone to get a license.
I have two questions. Who administers the tests?
Pearson, they'll be administered through Pearson at computer-based testing centers.
Pearson administers the test.
Yeah.
Who decides that the person is qualified to take the test?
You. Well, the higher ed folks recommend when their students take the test, but these tests that you approve standards for will be to receive initial licensure or to add a license.
So is this the group who decided that all teachers need to take a test to obtain their license?
The answer would be yes.
So the
State Board of Ed.
So the State Board of Ed,
Yes.
we determined that everyone, that to obtain a license, you needed to pass the test.
Content tests.
There's also
Content
legislative
test.
language.
And there's legislative language that also said this.
Right.
And so then those tests are administered by Pearson, usually through the universities.
The tests are administered through Pearson at Pearson computer-based testing
Okay.
centers.
Now, and then, as you know, then we can kind of go back to REPA 2. That would say that these tests would be very much in play with that type of setting.
These tests were actually developed on the basis of the first REPA.
Okay.
So all of the tests that are included in there. There are,
Standards are the same.
yeah.
I got one more, I'm sorry. Are the cut scores, I'm assuming that, when Pearson developed these scores, these tests, did they develop them just for Indiana?
Yes.
So these are not tests that are administered in various states?
No, these tests were developed solely for Indiana. They're based completely on the Indiana educator standards. The test development process involved bringing in Indiana teachers and teacher educators to review every single item that's included on the test.
Okay.
And the standard setting process is just sort of the last step of that development.
I see, thank you.
And I might add that cutoffs can change. Just because we're making a cutoff now doesn't mean that after we've given the assessments that we might not adjust those and bring things back to the board. This is the recommendation of the groups that they put together and the cut scores that are recommended at this time to move forward. Did I get that correct?
That's correct. And the recommendation is to set a preliminary passing standard. We've been talking with the department about once the test is in place. You've been involved in a very systematic effort to improve education in the state. This is one small piece of that. And we've been involved in discussions with the department as to once you get this program up and running, what you would want to do, which includes just what Superintendent Ritz said, looking at how examinees actually perform, and then possibly considering adjusting the passing standards at that time.
And it's based on REPA 1, and we're still debating REPA 2. So I'm going to abstain or vote no on this for the record because of that issue.
Well, it's not bearing on REPA 2 at all. These were the tests that were put in place to give teachers extended licenses and to test their knowledge level. They've been in the process for a long time. They're in the waiver. Those are the very tests that are referenced in the waiver. What might help clear up this discussion perhaps a little bit is if you look on the test design and assessment blueprint page that you have. Do you have that sample? You'll see at the bottom there are 4 domains. This might help Neil with the dialogue. A percentage of questions are coming in several different domains on the test. So to actually just say, hey, you should get an 80% in that, and then you get your license and figure out the numerical piece, is not an exact science way to look at, because the different parts of the test and each test has a different weight of questions in a different domain. Am I getting this correct?
There's one score, there's one passing score for a test.
Oh, correct.
The relative weighting of
Right.
the areas varies across the
Correct, and that's what I was
domains.
saying, it varies from test to test, which is why you're seeing different kinds of cutoffs for even the same number of questions that might be on a test. Go ahead, Dave.
I'm looking at test code 35, it's mathematics. We've previously discussed today the importance of mathematics to our children's future. Possible total 80, recommended passing 51, which is 64% if I do my math right, which means in almost every school I know of, either a D or an F grade, and this would recommend that a teacher that gets that gets to pass. And what am I missing?
I don't really think that you can equate percentages to the content of the test, because these tests are meant to be criterion reference tests. They're not meant to be norm reference tests. So what, in essence, the standard setting process does is it asks educators, we spent a great deal of time discussing what does an effective teacher for your content area look like? And who is just qualified, who is ready to get the license. And how we define that was they would be individuals who would be able to teach all of the courses offered by the license. So for example, mathematics, that includes all the way up through AP calculus, IB courses, all the way down to 5th grade math, because the license covers grade 5 through 12. And so we spent a lot of time talking about that process and defining, having educators think about the knowledge and skills that those teachers need. Then what they did was they took the test and they made a judgment about, okay, this is what effective teachers look like. They have to be able to teach all of the courses. They have to be able to teach the Indiana academic standards. They have to be able to teach kids of diverse abilities, from the most academically advanced to the least. And then they made their judgment. So you don't really, it's not a fair representation to say a 75% is what someone needs to be a licensed teacher in the area. Excuse me, in the area.
Then why do you assign total points? I mean, the bottom line is you're saying that of the total, you could, if you had complete mastery of this, you'd get 80 points, and you only need 51 to pass. I mean, why do it that way if you're saying it's not relevant? I mean, I don't understand. I really don't.
What would
And
be
what
the-
you just said, I mean, the point you made about the breadth of ability, or the breadth of students you have to teach, argues in fact for being able to demonstrate even more mastery, not less. So why is a 51 good enough?
Well, the criterion tests are standard-based, and we're still discussing the standards.
And the standards on which these tests are based don't change in REPA 3. They're the same educator standards.
What's the consequence of not passing this today?
The testing program doesn't get implemented and you continue with the current vendor.
And who is that?
We currently use ETS, and we have used ETS tests. The series is called Praxis. You may have heard reference to
Praxis
Praxis
1 and
tests.
2.
Praxis 1 and 2. We are already moving to the Pearson Basic Skills Assessment this summer, but we are still using the Praxis 2 content area tests for licensure until these new tests are
But
developed.
if we want to learn more and discuss this, the train doesn't come to a halt.
These have to be posted
Well-
for 30 days.
well,
These have to be posted for 30 days.
We post whatever you preliminarily approve in terms of the tests, and the cut scores have to be posted for public comment for 30 days, and then we would bring those comments back to you with any recommendations that we thought the public comment warranted. The new tests and cut scores cannot be applied to candidates for licensure until 6 months after you make your final approval. So if these would come back to you for final approval at your July meeting, we still could not start applying them to candidates for licensure for 6 months. These tests that are customized and based on our educator standards were a part of the ESEA waiver application for the department. We have entered into a contract with Pearson to develop these tests and put them in place.
Changes the
And
timeline.
that contract has been in place for 18 months already, and they've been involved in test development for 18 months.
So Reese, I missed that point. We're putting it on the table today if we vote for it, but theoretically, we could come back and there's base level, and then there's SEM 1 up and SEM 2. We could come back next month and say, no, we've decided we want SEM 2
Well,
as our cut score.
You could, and you may have some public comment that suggests exactly that, and that would certainly, warrant adjusting that before you make your final approval.
Passing or not passing, it isn't real high, because we
Well,
can still,
today,
we're not giving
Wait a
up.
minute.
You're not
Excuse me.
doing final approval today.
And we could change our minds without public comment by next month. We could go to SEM 2 next month, even if there was nobody from the public that said.
You could. I would say whatever score you approve finally for us, we can gather live test taker data for the next year and come back to you and say, this is what the results are of the individuals who've actually taken this test, and see what those look like, and you could also use that as the basis to make an adjustment too, to either go up or down. Sometimes it's easier to move a test score up in the future than it is to move it down, just because of the ramifications to the people who in that interim did or didn't pass. But this will allow us to at least post something preliminarily for public comment for the next 30 days.
I'll make a motion, we accept the proposal of Teresa.
Do I hear a second?
Second.
I'll second with the understanding that we're simply putting it in play. And I, for one, would like to understand better what a 5180 really means before the next meeting.
Sure, we'd be happy to
You
make a
know,
presentation.
normally I would be okay with putting it in play, but I'm not sure how much, I'm a little concerned that if we don't have any public comment to justify perhaps, say, a tougher cut score, that we wind up having some issue with then changing the rule. Do we have to then go back for more public comment?
This isn't actually a promulgation.
Right, yeah.
The
I didn't
rule
explain.
simply requires
That's
that
it.
we post it for public comment,
Right.
and that you have an opportunity to see what that public coming in. This
Are we
is
not
not a
working-
promulgation.
Are we not working against a deadline then?
No, except that obviously it's 6 months.
The
Every
deadline
month.
we're working on is really that we can't even apply these to candidates
Right.
for 6 additional months.
But see, I'm more in favor of I'd like to know more about how these cut scores are created before we even post them preliminarily, frankly. I'm willing to wait a month to get more information.
I wish Mrs. Wicker was here. She actually came to the standard setting and participated.
Well, that's
in the
fine, maybe you
standard
should
setting
come back.
process.
But also, what level of accreditation, I'm trying to think, I should know some of this, but the cut score for what certification they're seeking as well. It also affects my thinking about some of this.
I think what the department is recommending is on the table, that gray shaded column. And those are cut scores, and they're for initial licenses. So they're for teachers beginning their career.
Just to get in the door.
get
It's
in
not for a level to teach calculus. See, I think what we need is we need the documents in advance, and we'll need a good discussion, because we want to make sure we have a high-quality teacher, and if you pass a test, that tells the teacher ed school and the university they can stay in the game. Otherwise, you counsel people out. You can't pass this test, you need to get out of that program. Yeah, and that would be
Okay.
with the present system we have. There's places along this way. So we need more understanding. It's obvious, huh?
Okay, we have a first and a second. Any more discussion? All those in favor say aye. Oh, no, roll call. Sorry. I caught myself. Go ahead, Becky.
Joe? Jim? Dan?
Aye.
Sarah's absent. Mike?
Aye.
Neil?
Nay.
David?
Nay.
Tony?
Aye.
BJ?
Aye.
Carrie's absent. Madam Superintendent?
Aye.
6-3.
Motion passes. We have one more item on the agenda, and it is board operations. And so I want to bring up something to you. We have several items that we know we need to bring to you in July, or by July. And so we are concerned, we have a June meeting set, but we're concerned that we may not have enough quorum or enough people here on July 3rd, which is really close to the holidays, to actually have a meeting. So we might want to look at June 26th to have that July meeting. And I could kind of send something out to you. And I did hear Dan say that perhaps at the June meeting, we have quite a few items that perhaps we don't want a study session that time, but go ahead and just have a full board meeting. So there are a couple items that I'm opening up for discussion. I am here, okay, July 3rd. So it's not an issue with me. But I just want to be sure that we have a lot of things that I know are going to be coming through. We have to be sure we meet.
So we'd have a June 5th meeting?
Yes.
And then
We're still
Ju-
having our June meeting as planned.
And then June 26th.
And then June 26th would be the only date other than the July 3rd.
June 26th, I'm out of town. Would July 10th work?
No, the other dates, I believe, the issues with them is that we needed to have things approved, really before the July time. I think that's was our issue.
Could we do the 5th and the 19th?
Okay, so a lot of people can't do the 26th. So we have enough people that are going to come in on the 3rd, the regularly scheduled meeting? Okay, we'll just keep it then.
No, I'm gone the 26th through the 4th is what I should have specified, I'm sorry.
Oh,
I thought you were asking July 3rd.
What June date?
we were looking at June 26th,
But you're also having the June 5th, as Dan said, right?
Yes.
June 3rd date, yes.
If necessary, I can schedule to be here on the 26th.
Well, I'll tell you what, why don't I send it out? I'll send it out electronically. We'll try and make a determination because we want to be sure we have a quorum, to be sure to have a meeting. And also, I'll take a look at the agenda and I'll get back with you as to, a study session or no study session,
I
so.
would recommend no study session. I think we have to spend some time on this, please.
All right. And we will invite Pearson back to go over this information. And that actually could be during a study session if we want to, and then have it on action as well. All right, any more items? Yes, Joe?
Point I want to bring up again, as I requested last month, the IDOE RISE support page is not up. While I understand IDOE wants to do individual corporations, I still believe we need to have some kind of support available to people who are using the RISE evaluation. It would also be helpful, I think, for board members to have access to the Learning Connection, particularly as it relates to school achievement. I know I can't get in and find any information on school corporations or growth or anything.
You will be able to do that, and
Okay.
it'll be on the web. We
Thank
are
you.
redesigning the entire web and the Learning Connection.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Move to adjourn?
Second to adjourn? So moved. This meeting is adjourned. Thank you.